It's River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer. This hour, we travel back to the Iowa that was, some 170 years ago, shortly after it gained statehood, and what was happening here in Iowa during the outbreak of the Civil War. Now, in the weeks after Fort Sumter's fall, that was in April of 1861, Iowa sent its very first soldiers into the Civil War. These were young men, teenagers, 20-year-olds mostly, from Burlington, Cedar Rapids, and other communities across the state, and they enlisted for exactly 90 days. Why? Because that's how long everyone thought the war would last. They were wrong about that. Of course, it stretched over 4 years and became the deadliest conflict in American history. But those 90 days took the young Iowa enlistees by steamboat down the Mississippi River and then on brutal marches through Missouri. They were hungry and undersupplied, and also under the command of a general they came to openly resent. And yet they kept going. They kept marching. On August 10th of 1861, they followed that general, his name, Nathaniel Lyon, into the Battle of Wilson's Creek near Springfield, Missouri. It was the first major Civil War battle fought west of the Mississippi, and Lyon became the first Union general killed in the Civil War. Well, and the soldiers of the First Iowa Infantry, after 90 days of hardship and confusion, one of them called it booming, buzzing bewilderment. They were able to gather and go home. But what kept them committed through all of that? That's a question at the center of a remarkable new book, meticulously researched over the course of 7 years. It's called The Union First, Community and Commitment in the First Iowa Infantry. And the author joins me in the Iowa City studio today. She is an Iowa City sociologist, independent historian, Randee Fieselmann. As I said, 7 years trying to answer a number of questions, working primarily from two extraordinary unpublished diaries. Randee, welcome to our show. Delighted to have you to talk about this significant bit of history.
Thank you very much. I love talking about it.
All right. In a moment, we're going to talk about these two men. You have focus on their diaries. One was a young German-American soldier from Cedar Rapids named George Burmeister, and then the other one, a Burlington soldier named Eugene Ware. But before that, take us back to your discovery that started this 7-year project. That's a story in itself. You were searching the Civil War collection at the University of Iowa for something specific and came across this. Tell us that story.
Well, I was looking for a diary or letters from a young man in Company K in Cedar Rapids. It was for historical research for my church. And there was nothing that I found except I noticed this amazing, beautiful handwriting on one of the diaries, and it was written by George Burmeister, and I couldn't help but start reading it. And then I was just thunderstruck by the story he told about the First Iowa Infantry, and I thought to myself, I don't know anything about it. I've never heard this story, and I think it's a story that needs to be retold. And so that launched me on the effort to read everything I could get my hands on. And this was during COVID, so I couldn't really get my hands on a lot of things that I needed. So I did a lot of digital research. But the next diary I got a hold of was actually a published memoir by Eugene Ware. And it was republished in 1991 by Camp Pope, which is a publisher right here in Iowa City. And so I was able to acquire that memoir, and it also was remarkable. Both diarists are just fantastic writers, and these two diaries stand out. I ended up reading every other diary that I know of written by a soldier in the First Iowa Infantry, and I do include some quotes from some of those diaries. But these two diaries really stand out because they're beautifully written And what I mean is the quality of their writing. What they talk about is different than the other diaries. They express emotions. They talk about fear. They make a lot of observations. And they just let us feel like we're there on their march.
Right. And one particular passage, and we're kind of jumping ahead. We'll do some scene setting before, but I'd like to have you read the passage about crossing the Osage River, because that really lives up to the billing that you said, where I got images in my head about this and how would I have behaved, but it really gives a sense of it. Set the scene for us. We're crossing the Osage. At what point are we in with the Iowa Infantry?
Okay, they have just left Boonville, Missouri. They have acquired enough wagons that they can move and chase the governor of Missouri to southwest Missouri. So the problem is it's been raining and it's muddy, and the rivers they have to cross are surging, flooding rivers. And the first river they crossed was the Grand River, so they've already made an exhausting crossing. And in fact, one of the officers asked if there was anyone who would swim the river to take ropes across so the rest of the troops could be ferried. And indeed, Eugene Ware volunteered to swim. Why? Because during training camp in Keokuk, they swam the Mississippi River for training.
Amazing.
It is amazing. That's amazing. So they had already done that. They're already tired. That had taken days. And then General Lyon ordered the First Iowa to get to the Osage River as quickly as they could. So they had to fast march to get there. And when they arrived, of course, the river was bank full, and Eugene Ware was determined to go in and cool off. And this is what he said. Every muscle was aching, and every nerve was on a quiver. I felt lonesome and did not want to talk. I stuck my bayonet fixed to the musket down into the ground and took off what few clothes I had and hung them on the gun. I passed a 6-foot snake in a bush that had been driven out of his hole by the water, and I shook him out but could not kill him. I then got into the water and sat in it up to my chin until I got cooled off, went back to the company line. The boys were lying around on the ground. Some were sleeping, some were smoking, and some were eating, but none were talking. We had no roll call, no guard mount, no bugling. It was everybody for himself.
A remarkable passage. What do you, being so acquainted with this and selecting it for your book, find remarkable about that passage?
Well, it gives us a really clear image of that moment, of how he felt alone. He needed to do something to cool off and get refreshed. And how at that moment there was little comradeship. They were just too exhausted. Mm-hmm. They were lying around not talking.
Eugene Ware, you write that he was young, boastful, always eager to join a fight, where George Burmeister is like almost an opposite personality.
That's true.
Yeah, talk a little bit about how they were different, how you got to know them through their diaries.
Well, I had to do a little more scoping to find out a little more about each of the young men. George is a little older. He's 22 when he enlisted. He was attending Western College in Shoeyville, and it was a very religious college, and he's a very religious young man. He's a German-American. His family came over in late 1840s, and they were on a farm in Iowa County. He was an exceptional young man. He started a debating society in the little community. He taught Sunday school and started a little school there. So he was a little more philosophical and a little less rowdy than young, rambunctious Eugene. Eugene grew up in Burlington, a river town, which was had a lot more Southern influence. So there were more as he describes it, more fights going on in the streets as secessionists and unionists would argue and the young boys would fight until he said the parents took little notice.
Remarkable. And you read a lot of other diaries here, all of them. How many diaries could you roughly speaking, were attached to the Iowa Infantry, this First Iowa Infantry?
Not many, 6. I have 6, and I just acquired the most recent one, and it's not mentioned in my book because it's just a few pages of writing that was held in the A.Y. McDonald family from Dubuque, and they sent it to me.
Right, and the simple fact that these diaries exist at all is remarkable. George Burmeister died. What was it, his brother who kept the diary safe?
His brother was in the same company when George was shot. This was after the First Iowa in terms of enlistment, and he re-enlisted and was shot in 1864 and died from the wound. And his brother was in the same company and, of course, could get his diary home.
Were Eugene and George in the same company, or did they know each other?
That's a really interesting question. My grandson asked me that question. Would they have known each other? Because they are not in the same company. One's from Cedar Rapids, and one enlisted in Burlington. But yes, I think they knew each other for 2 reasons. They bunked together, and then later there were 6 companies that went to the first skirmish. They would have known each other.
We have to take a short break. Back to this fascinating conversation with Randee Fieselmann, author of The Union First, Community and Commitment in the First Iowa Infantry. And Randee, when we come back, I want to have you set the scene. It's so remarkable and has really, I guess you can draw what you want about the messages it has for today. Our state was just 15 years old in 1861, genuinely divided, and on the border of a slave state, Missouri. We'll be back with more from Randee Fieselmann. Union First. It's River to River from IPR News. We're back with more River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer. My guest this hour, Iowa City author, sociologist, Randee Fieselmann. She spent 7 years searching, for diaries, 6 of them, but 2 remarkable ones in particular. Soldier Diaries, the title of her book, The Union First, Community and Commitment in the First Iowa Infantry. One of the diaries kept by a young German-American soldier from Cedar Rapids, George Burmeister, and then the other by a Burlington soldier named Eugene Ware. Okay, Randee, let's talk about the world these young men came from. Iowa, a young, newly established state in the Union. Kansas in 1861 just granted statehood. Iowa had been some 15 years as a state. And then to the south, bordering a slave state, Missouri. And you write that Iowa in many ways was a microcosm of the turmoil that gripped the entire North before the war began. Help us understand what Iowa was like in 1861 from what you've gathered, and why it was not simply or unanimously pro-union, as some might suggest.
I think many people misunderstand and believe that Iowa was unified in their thinking and politics at the time. It was very divided. We had, because most of the population was along the Mississippi River, those cities where the soldiers enlisted were Dubuque and Muscatine, Davenport, Burlington, Mount Pleasant, and then also Cedar Rapids and Iowa City. But most of the population was centered along the rivers, especially the Mississippi. And the Mississippi carried a lot of trade back and forth from the south. And so there was a lot of sentiment that supported slavery in Iowa. And it was a battle. It was a battle for politics. But the politics in Iowa shifted, and they did vote Iowa did vote for Lincoln, but it was a small margin.
Mm-hmm. And talk a little bit about what you gained in knowledge about the motivations of these soldiers. Fort Sumter is what happened there, and it's very interesting. Earlier this year, Eric Larson was my guest on this program, and his latest book talking about the siege of Fort Sumter there. And you use this phrase, an epidemic of war fever broke out after Fort Sumter, which fell to the Confederate troops. What happened here in Iowa, specifically in those weeks after that bombardment of that fort on the East Coast?
Well, I can only use these two diaries, and I don't want to claim that they are representative of all the soldiers or of all people in Iowa. But the reason these soldiers enlisted was because of the attack on Fort Sumter and the declaration of the South that the Confederacy existed. The southern states had already been seceding, and so they claimed with Fort Sumter war against the United States. And they enlisted because they believed in a unified union. They did not want two countries. It's hard to conceive what would have happened had the North not won the war. We would have had another country along the southern border of the North. Yeah,
that's remarkable. So what could you tell from these diaries? And yes, I think that's a great footnote to put there, that you're just drawing on these diaries. How did slavery enter the picture when it came to the motivation of Eugene and George and others you tested here in their diaries?
Well, they hated slavery, and they wanted no part of it. They had been witnesses to the Fugitive Slave Act, which they really disliked, and they saw people turning freed slaves back over to marshals. They thought that was really brutal and inhumane. They wanted nothing to do with slavery. Yet, like Lincoln, like Ulysses Grant, and like their would-be captain and General Lyon, they believed in the Missouri Compromise. They thought it had been in place for 40 years. To them, it was much like the Constitution.
And explain what the Missouri Compromise was.
The Missouri Compromise, it allowed Missouri into the Union as the northernmost slave state. And the border that was drawn north of Missouri and across the country was the dividing line between where slavery would be allowed and where it would not be allowed in the future. But that had been changed, and the Southern control of Congress had changed it so that it allowed for now popular sovereignty in the new territories like Kansas. And that set off a wave of war before the Civil War, the bloody border wars in Kansas, fighting over whether or not it would be a slave state or a free state.
Mm-hmm. In your book, you mentioned that some of these young men had ancestors who fought in the Revolutionary War. And when we talk about this, 1861, the Revolutionary War is then less than 100 years.
Less than 100 years.
Before this. And that was, religious freedom. That was a fight over that. They had religious persecution. That mattered too. You mentioned George attended Western College, a religious college. Connect that to help us understand the context of where they came from in their thinking and what would have shaped them at this time. Because we get a strong sense of their patriotism here, trying to preserve the Union.
Well, that's what I was going to say. They're very patriotic. They have, both boys have been very highly educated. They've taken a lot of civics classes, and they're very proud of this democracy. So it's a fragile democracy. The Constitution is fragile. They understand that. And they simply do not want it to end. And the Germans, a lot of the Germans who had emigrated here, emigrated to get out of an aristocratic class power. And they certainly didn't come to America to be exposed and live side by side with an aristocratic class with slaves, which is what they considered the Southerners.
If you just joined us, my guest this hour, Randee Fieselmann, author of The Union First, Community and Commitment in the First Iowa Infantry, about Iowa's first Civil War soldiers and the question of what kept them committed to the cause through 90 days of hardship in Missouri. This would be the summer of 1861, and we're coming to the culmination of this, at least refer to it. You have to get a real taste of it, you have to read the book, culminating in a Battle of Wilson's Creek happening in Missouri in August of 1861. If you want to find out more about this book, theunionfirst.com is a website, and you'll see pictures of Eugene Ware and George Burmeister at theunionfirst.com. I want to get back to some more diary entries and your encapsulation of that. I wonder if we can go to where they are marching, and they observe some beauty, but the remarkable thing that you comment on and capture here is the beauty that doesn't go unnoticed, even though they're in tremendous hardship. And we really have to put ourselves in their shoes, crossing a river maybe 20 times, and they're still able to observe the beauty around them. Do you have a passage that can speak to that?
Yeah, I think it's a remarkable passage. They had just marched 20-some miles in rain and mud without sleep. And they were pretty sure they were surrounded by rebels, so there was danger. They were very aware of it. And despite the danger, they had to have fear, and they had suffered exertion. But as if astonished, the soldiers wrote in their diaries about the amazing, clear, beautiful streams in Missouri. George tells that even though they crossed these streams and their shoes filled with sand and water, and they crossed one, as you said, one little creek 22 times, he describes the clear streams like crystal, the most beautiful he ever saw. And Eugene writes, they had a crystalline flash and beauty that enchanted us. They were running with water as pellucid as air and sunlight.
That's beautiful. What does that tell you about these men?
They were truly astonished at the beauty, and I'm sure it stood out to them as a connection to a world outside, that nature is stronger than perhaps the moment they're in.
And I wonder, we have to also consider here in the 21st century, we get to travel around the United States. There's people who do that, bucket list of visiting every single state. At this time in our history, that was not really a doable thing to visit everywhere. So these men would have grown up in Iowa, probably not been, too far away from where they grew up, as most people were at this time. So when they got to a different landscape, that was really something. It wasn't just a trip to the Grand Canyon, was it?
And thank goodness they appreciated it. And an interesting point is in almost every one of those other diaries, and many of the diaries only talk about the weather and what they had to eat, which was mostly cornmeal mush, they mention the beautiful rivers.
Okay. Well, let's get to have a taste of the climax of your book. On to Missouri. Their march was, and you make the point here that their march alone was, longer than most soldiers would have had out east, right? This was a real trial.
That's what other authors have written.
Mm-hmm. Part 2 of the book you call Combustible Missouri and the Men Who Lit the Matches. Set the scene for us here. What made Missouri so explosive in the spring of 1861? Who were the key figures striking the sparks?
Well, one of the important things is President Lincoln understood the importance of Missouri to the Union. It's a border state. It's a slave state, but it's still in the Union. And they had the St. Louis Arsenal was the largest federal arsenal in the southern states. And we have to remember that all the other federal arsenals have been taken over by the South. So that he understood that that arsenal was very critical, because if it fell, Missouri could fall. And if Missouri fell, he worried that they might lose the battle of the Civil War. And unfortunately, the governor of Missouri was a strong secessionist. Mm-hmm. And he represented himself as a neutral peacemaker, but he wasn't. He was devious, and he was communicating with the Confederacy all along, and they were planning to attack the arsenal. So this feisty little General Nathaniel Lyon was assigned to protect the arsenal. And Lincoln made it clear that he wanted them to not lose it. So this was a battle just waiting to happen. It was a fuse waiting to blow.
And you push back against a historical narrative here, Randee, that portrays Nathaniel Lyon, General Lyon, as the aggressor in Missouri, and Jackson as a neutral governor defending the state. You came to a different conclusion than some historians would. Why?
Well, because the facts show that he was communicating with the South. He was plotting to take the arsenal, and much of what he told the Missouri citizens was not true. And he did that on purpose. It was a strategy to make the Union and the Federals appear as the coercive aggressors, because that's what would make people follow him.
Yeah. So we tend to think that disinformation is a part of our age.
Right. It was. He used it very skillfully.
Okay. So talk a little bit about Nathaniel Lyon, the general here, because his men didn't like him, came to really dislike him. Why? What kind of person was he?
He was an irritant. He never said a nice word. He imposed harsh discipline on soldiers. He expected them to perform according to duty and regulation, and he never gave anybody a break, any of the soldiers. And the Iowa soldiers wanted to be recognized for their discipline, their hard work, their efforts, and the fact that they were volunteers. And they had the feeling all along that Lyon didn't like them. Part of the problem was he wasn't getting supported by his superiors with reinforcements and food and supplies. And the Iowa soldiers in particular were really ragged. And his regular soldiers had been outfitted from the St. Louis Armory and had spiffy outfits and nice guns. And our poor boys had old, outdated muskets, and they were in rags, and they felt like Lyon didn't like them.
Some even in aprons?
Some put aprons over their backsides to cover where they had worn out.
So their bottoms didn't show.
Their bottoms didn't show, right. Because all their outfits had been made by volunteers in their own communities. They didn't match. They were a mismatched, funny-looking group.
In fact, General Lyon called them gypsies. Was that
right.
why?
Yeah.
So these Iowa soldiers had expressed open hatred for General Lyon. In what ways? How did they express that?
Oh, they wrote about it in their diaries. They said, he does not like us, and we do not like him very well.
They're hungry and resentful. We have to go to a break in a minute. They followed him to battle anyway. How do you account for that?
Well, you have to read the book. Readers will have to read to find out. But it has to do with community that they had built, the strength of their comradeship and leadership.
Okay. We'll talk about that after a break. Fascinating. Randee Fieselmann with us, author of The Union First, Community and Commitment in the First Iowa Infantry. After the break, we come to the climax, or at least we get a sense of it, because you have to read the book to really dig into the details here. Iowa's first Civil War soldiers. The question of what kept them committed to the cause through 90 days of hardship in Missouri in the summer of 1861, culminating in the Battle of Wilson's Creek in Missouri in August of 1861. And we'll talk about that when we return. And this is a battle that has to do with that St. Louis Armory, right?
No, that was Camp Jackson. This battle in Wilson's Creek is down by Springfield in the southwest corner of the state.
Okay, Randee Fieselmann will talk about it when we return. It's River to River from IPR News. Back with more River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer. Fort Sumter fell in April of 1861. We're talking about the months there, April until August, within weeks of April, that Fort Sumter fell to the Confederate troops. Iowa sent its very first soldiers into the Civil War, young men, teenagers, really. My guest said 22 was an older person, an older member of this infantry from Cedar Rapids, Burlington, other places, enlisting for just 90 days. They thought, and they did enlist for 90 days, believing the war would be over then. They were wrong, of course. So Randee Fieselmann is taking us on this several-month brutal marches through Missouri, hunger, confusion, phantom battles, to a climactic fight at Wilson's Creek in August of 1861. This is the first major Civil War battle west of the Mississippi. We're skipping a lot here, but set up the Battle of Wilson's Creek for us. What did it mean for the war, for Missouri, and for these Iowa boys?
Well, let me clarify something. It occurred because the governor and his appointed general of the Missouri State troops went south very quickly to get Confederate help after Nathaniel Lyon was chasing them. So he was after them, but he had 200 wagons to haul and thousands of troops, and he had to and very little cavalry, and he had to march all the way down. So that the governor and his General Price went and had already made plans to get help from General Benjamin McCulloch, who was leading troops from Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana. So they had, the Union rumors were that there were 20 to 30,000 combined troops that they were going to have to fight. And they were really wanting to capture the Union troops. And the Confederates entered Missouri. They came into Missouri. And so there was a showdown just outside Springfield. And the governor and the general had all of this support, and so they felt confident. So they were going to capture and attack Springfield, Missouri, which is where our troops were camped. This is where Lyon and all of his troops were camped.
And the Iowa boys, too.
And the Iowa boys, they're in different places, sometimes miles outside of Springfield, but so Lyon had to decide what to do. Does he retreat? And it's almost too late to retreat because the Confederates have come in and they have so many troops, they can surround them. He's in trouble. So he makes this decision, which has been highly criticized. It's either heroic or a big mistake to do a surprise attack. Mm-hmm. And he attacks them early on the morning of August 10th. And the Iowa troops are with him. And the Union troops bring it. They fight and fight and fight. And the Confederates respond equally. And General Lyon is shot and killed. And he had a plan, which he had apparently told his leaders that they should call a stop and a retreat. Well, there was a lull in the battle, and Sturgis, the man who was leading the Kansas troops, called a halt and a retreat. And the small Union army of less than 4,000 retreated to Springfield. And one of the mysteries is, why didn't the overwhelming numbers of Confederate forces follow them?
Mm-hmm. A mystery, and what is your feeling about the answer to that? Why they didn't? Only 4,000 troops, and you said the other side the Confederates had tens of thousands.
10 or 20,000, mm-hmm. 20,000 probably. Well, what's written, the record says it's because they were running short on ammunition, and they were glad to see the enemy go. The boys write, Eugene writes, that there was a fire set on their wagons, and so their ammunition would have been burning. That's debatable. That's debated, but I have gathered together several pieces of evidence that says it's true, that their wagons, their supply wagons were burning. General McCulloch and General Price did not get along, and there may have been some disagreement, but for whatever reason, they allowed the Union soldiers to go to Springfield, to pack up and retreat all the way to Rolla, which was 125 miles away, mm-hmm. on foot and the wagon train. Now, the Union soldiers didn't know that they weren't going to be followed and attacked. They feared it every step of the way.
They thought there was troops in hot pursuit of them.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Let me end this way and remind any listeners who may have just joined us. Randee Fieselmann is with me this hour, author of The Union First, Community and Commitment in the First Iowa Infantry, Iowa's first Civil War soldiers, and the campaign, the 90-day campaign they engaged in down in Missouri that Randee is describing us. You spent 7 years immersed in this period, and I can really talk. I'm looking right at you, Randee. You know this story inside and out, don't you?
I do. I know a lot about the First Iowa Infantry, but I admit I am not a Civil War historian, and I know very little about the rest of the Civil War. So if someone comes up to me and says, "Oh, by the way, I have a relative who was in the 63rd Regiment," I know nothing, and I apologize.
What's remarkable, though, you are a trained sociologist. You are not, I don't know, were you before this time a Civil War buff in any way?
Never.
Never.
Not at all.
You dove into this head first, and you really immersed yourself for 7 years, and you obviously have a passion for this. How did it change the way you think about our Civil War? Because undoubtedly you had a grade school understanding of the Civil War, or during your life had a certain understanding of the Civil War. How did it change that?
I just became deeply concerned that it could happen again, and I never want to hear anyone mention that perhaps we're headed towards civil war. We lost, I think, about 13,000 troops just from Iowa.
Hundreds of thousands lost in the whole country.
620,000. Between the estimates now have gone up, 620,000 to 750,000 possible deaths.
And many more casualties, over 1 million casualties.
Yeah, it's an enormous loss and waste of life. Many of them died of typhoid and dysentery, probably as many as were killed in battle. But I just think we must find ways to solve our differences other than thinking that war will solve our problems.
A big part of your story we referenced before, you really dig into the mechanics of disinformation. Much of the path to Wilson's Creek was paved with disinformation. You account that is really central to how this crisis unfolded, isn't it? Misinformation. That's something.
It was a political strategy.
Uh-huh.
And very carefully planned and used. And because I kept asking the question, why did people follow what I call the fire eaters, the few politicians across the South who really wanted the war? Somehow they got the people on board. And I keep asking, wondering, this, I didn't address this in the book, but I keep wondering, why? Why did the people buy into it?
So these fire eaters, a historical phenomenon, relatively small group of Southern extremist politicians managing to pull an entire region and ultimately the nation into war that most ordinary people on both sides didn't want and weren't prepared for. How did they get the name fire eaters? Do you know that?
I don't know. It's been around a long time. Eugene used it in his diary. It was common even right at the time of the Civil War. They used it also for strong, opinionated abolitionists who were willing to go to war for abolition. So they used the term on both sides. People who were extremists.
Mm-hmm. So is this a question you're still working on here after 7 years of research? What are the unanswered questions that are still puzzling you?
Well, I am curious about how so many people were convinced that this was right. Also because one of the things that's just startling to me, and Nathaniel Lyon pointed this out, he actually wrote a series of letters to a Kansas newspaper before he was assigned to the St. Louis Arsenal. And he said, the South wants to go to war for the extension of slavery. But if they lose the war, or even if they win the war and they are a Confederate with a borderline, all the opportunities for the extension of slavery will be held in the North. So it's an oxymoron. He recognized it, and I'm shocked that wasn't pointed out or that people didn't seem to understand it.
Your title of this book is a direct statement, Randee. The Union First. That was the value that cut across the political differences for these Iowa soldiers in 1861. They came from different parties, different backgrounds, different opinions. What they shared, though, was a commitment to one America, not two. Do you think, for the relevance of today's readers, studiers of history, is that still operative? Have we lost the thing that made it possible, that motivated these young Iowans?
That's a big question, and I don't know the answer. I think it would be very hard to recapture that kind of patriotic fervor for a democracy. A democracy has to be very just and has to be working to even... for me to imagine that people would volunteer their lives for it, and I'm not sure.
Yeah, you must have gained a lot of gratitude towards people like Eugene and George, and all those that supported those efforts.
Absolutely, and they also followed Nathaniel Lyon. We might wonder why they followed him when they disliked him so much. Two things. He represented the cause. They knew that he was absolutely laser focused on winning because he was committed to the same cause they wanted. And number two, they recognized, as they said, they began to respect a leader who knows his business.
In the final minute or two, what else do you hope readers in Iowa or elsewhere in 2026 or beyond take away from your book here? What are some lessons or thoughts you want to leave us with? An
appreciation of these remarkable young men, how gifted they were in leadership and strength and commitments, and how brave they were. Not that they didn't have fear. They admit to having fear, but just how they were willing to leave their homes and do all the things they did. And it was so much more difficult than any of them imagined.
Mm-hmm. What's next for you here? Does this kind of story end with this book? What will you continue to pursue as you're sort of an independent historian here?
Well, I'll keep looking carefully at the book, hoping for a second edition and to add a few things and to fill in a few things that I missed. But I don't intend to write another book.
Yeah. What historians of this period, writing about this period, do you admire the most? I mentioned Eric Larson.
Well, I really admire the people who wrote about Iowa in the Civil War. Kenneth Lifgott has written 3 volumes about Iowa in the Civil War, and I relied on his first volume, Free Child of the Missouri Compromise, for information about Iowa during this time. And Thomas Baker has written The Sacred Cause of the Union, Iowa in the Civil War. And he takes a broad view of many people, some of whom were at home, some of who were helping in support teams, not just soldiers and not just battles. So I admire those 2 authors very much.
Mm-hmm. You are retired as a sociologist, but you were captured by this work of history. Could you have imagined yourself as a career historian? It seems like you've got all the makings for it. It sure does.
I don't think I'll fall upon a story that I love so much or that I thought was so valuable that it needed to be retold.
As this book. Okay.
It was just a coincidence that put me on this trajectory.
And surprised you, I'm sure, that the passion that it awakened in you.
That's right. That's a good way to put it.
Okay. Randee Fieselmann, check it out. She's the author of The Union First, a new book, Community and Commitment in the First Iowa Infantry, about Iowa's first Civil War soldiers. Randee, thank you for coming into the studio and sharing this remarkable and remarkably well-researched book with us. Congratulations on it.
Thank you for the opportunity, Ben.
Today's show produced by Danny Gear with help from Caitlin Troutman. Our executive producer is Catherine Perkins. I'm Ben Kiefer. Thanks for joining us.